Okay, so hi everyone, my name's Beth, my pronouns are she, her. I'm the community support worker here at Lancashire LGBT. And just for the purpose of an audio description, I've got long brown curly hair, I'm wearing red glasses, I've got a microphone that comes onto my face here, I'm wearing a brown top, and my background is white with our Lancashire LGBT logos on either side of me. So just a bit of housekeeping to start with. All the audience will have their cameras off and their mics off. And we will also be having a zero tolerance policy towards any form of discrimination as usual. So if any of that does happen, then people will be kicked out, I'm afraid. And just a bit about the mental health hour in itself. We started it earlier on this year, and this is our 5th episode. And we're really, really pleased to be doing an episode for TDOR this year. So the purpose of the mental health hour was to look at LGBT plus mental health and the different intersections of that, and how we should really be treating ourselves better, looking after our well-being as LGBT plus people more so than others. So without further ado, I'm now going to introduce our wonderful guest for this evening. So Dr. Jay McNeil, who's a clinical psychologist and a trans rights advocate. Jay has spent over a decade working for and within trans communities, co-founding Trans Bearall in 2009, and then working with other organisations. In 2012, he led the Trans Mental Health Study, the first and largest study of trans people's mental health and wellbeing in the UK at the time. He has delivered training, spoken at conferences nationally and internationally, and produced media concerning trans people's mental health and wellbeing. He has published research on suicide in trans people and on the impact of social factors and transition. He is a principal clinical psychologist working in the NHS and continues to advocate for trans and non-binary people's rights. Being trans is an important part of his identity, personally and professionally, and he uses he, him pronouns. And just while I remember to introduce Craig, sorry, as well, our BSL for this evening. Hello, Craig. So now, hi, Jay.
Hi, God, when you say all of those things out loud, it actually sounds quite scary.
Well, it's you, and it's your great
Yeah,
introduction.
gosh.
So
Um,
thank you for joining us this evening.
you're welcome. I should just give a visual description for myself as
Yes, of
well.
course.
So I'm a white guy. I'm pretty much almost bald. I have a very small goatee and a horseshoe septum piercing. Got blue eyes. I'm wearing a black t-shirt and a white shirt with black skulls on it. And I've got a terribly painted white wall behind me with a red notice board and a Progress Pride flag. Thank you.
Perfect. Thank you for that, Jay. Okay, so let's get into it, hey? So we start by looking at your quite remarkable career trajectory. If you want to speak to that initially, like looking at where you started and obviously Trans Bearall and then training to be a clinical psychologist. Let's just go from there, really.
Okay. I mean, and you might have to stop me because I might talk about this quite a lot.
That's fine.
Because it's complicated, because I think it's almost impossible to separate out my journey in terms of my identity and being a trans person and someone who identifies as a trans person and my professional life as a psychologist. They're really intertwined.
Right.
So I'll try. Yeah, I'll try and do some justice to that. I don't know if I will. So I guess I mean, I came out as a lesbian when I was 15, which I think was fairly standard for a lot of people that I know. And I knew that I was different, and I had a really hard time with that. I had a lot of bullying, and I guess I was depressed from my teens right through to my early 30s, really, because I just didn't know what to do with all of that. And I spent most of my life feeling totally overwhelmed. And at the same time, going into uni, I started to explore gender a little bit more once I'd moved away from home, had a bit more freedom. And I knew I wasn't a lesbian. It wasn't that I was unhappy with that term. It actually felt like a really strong and quite powerful identity. It just wasn't mine. And I'd just never heard of trans people. There was a really awful program in the 90s called Eurotrash, and I vaguely remember seeing trans people on that. But it was, very much in a kind of sort of freak show sort of way of viewing trans identity. And I definitely never heard of trans men. And it wasn't until probably my mid-20s where I met other trans guys and could see myself reflected in them and in their journeys. So I found community really through that. And it was awesome. And I guess I got interested in psychology because, I had a really rough time, as I was saying, and I had an excellent counsellor, a guy called Rob Hudson, who sadly is not with us, and he changed my life. And I wanted to be able to give that gift to to other people. So simultaneously as to working out who I was pursuing psychology through my degree and looking at my identity. And then I met Lee Gale, who at the time ran a group called T-Boys in Sheffield. And through seeing people really struggling with identity because we just didn't have any representation at the time, he and a few friends, and then I got involved in producing a calendar called the Transtastic Men, and it was a calendar of images of naked trans men in a kind of calendar girl style, so you couldn't actually really see anything, and it was, there's lots of like teacups and in strategic places and stuff like that. And but we wanted to represent a range of trans identities, trans masculine identities, and a range of different ways of embodying trans masculinity that didn't necessarily involve hormones or surgery, although they did for some. And I'm super proud of that. I'm super proud of being involved in that. The only thing I look back on now and I would do differently is that we didn't represent true diversity in our community, because it was mainly looking at white masculinity, not exclusively, but ultimately that's what we did, and I would change that now.
Yeah.
And then with TBA, I guess we started that because in doing the calendar, lots of the people who took part in that felt so empowered through seeing other people with similar bodies, through having their identities validated, through regardless of what they looked like underneath their clothes, they could still be them. And we wanted to bring that to a much wider audience. So we set up Trans Bear All. And I guess that was about 2009. So it's been going for a really long time now. I'm actually not involved in it anymore. I haven't been since about 6 years in. But it's got a management committee, and it's still running, and I'm still very fond of it.
Yeah. And maybe for someone who's never heard of Trans Bear All, just kind of explain it in simple terms.
Yeah, sure. So it's an organization that we set up to that hosts retreats primarily, like weekend-long retreats, and each retreat had a kind of theme, and body image is something that was very popular. We did workshops on consent and how to negotiate that if you weren't happy with your body, or even if you were, how to verbalize your desires, how to think about loss and grief. We've covered so many different topics, but all of the retreats had a focus on body positivity and celebrating and validating people's identities. And yeah, it's great. I'm so proud of it. They produced a book to celebrate 10 years. That's beautiful artworks of lots of different trans people and stories, and it's just, it's been an incredible journey, and I'm very grateful to have been involved in it.
Yeah, that sounds amazing. Obviously picking up a lot of themes around initially representation and the ramifications of having like a lack of representation. Would you say that that's a big thing for trans people in your experiences, in terms of mental health, that lack of representation, not seeing yourself sort of in society and media and culture, for example?
Yeah, it's a huge issue, or equally as damaging if the only time you do see yourself is in being portrayed in a really negative way.
Yeah.
So yeah, it's huge. Trans mental health is actually really complicated, which I suppose is probably not a surprise to anyone, because we live in a really complex world. The way that the world interacts with us and the way we interact with it is can be challenging at times. So there's all the sort of the usual difficulties that people have in life, are all the same for trans people. Mental health is the same in that sense. But on top of that, minority stress theories talk about that if you're in a minority group or a socially oppressed group, there's additional layers that you also then have to negotiate. So yes, you have all the usual stresses, but also there's all these other things on top of that. And definitely misrepresentation or poor representation can have a huge impact.
Yeah, absolutely. It's a really important issue to think about. And in terms of like the Trans Bear All and the, great benefits that people have found from that, particularly around body image, would you say that that sense of empowerment that came through like the calendar and Trans Bear All has had a real positive impact on people's mental health who've attended? Have you had, feedback to attest to that, and obviously your lived experience of yourself?
Yeah, definitely. I'm a bit of a data fiend. I love data. I get very excited by it. So, which is probably shouldn't be, but from the moment we first started running retreats, I was gathering data to evaluate them. I'm a psychologist, we're kind of scientists, practitioners, we like to get evidence, and yeah, universally people have found the retreats and have found that environment to be positive. And it's not just that it's a focus on body positivity, it's not just that it's that these type of events and these type of groups can enable people to be seen as themselves without having to negotiate that. It's also about community and forming community and having connection and feeling part of something. I think that that's the most important thing that we've done, really, and the most important thing that a lot of the groups that are coming up and around nowadays are doing.
Absolutely, we can really attest to that at Lancashire LGBT as well, just from the groups that we've set up. That sense of community is so important. And are the Trans Bear All retreats still happening? How can people, if they're watching and thinking that's something they want to do, how can they get in touch with that?
Oh yeah, there's a website. They haven't happened through COVID, obviously. I guess a lot of things have changed for everyone with that, but I think next year, as far as I'm aware, they are looking at restarting them. Maybe initially it might just be outdoors through camping. There's some premises they use that have room for that and for outdoor stuff. So yeah, but check out the website, check and just see. It's initially when we started TBA, it was mainly focused on trans masculine people and people who had that kind of element in their identity. However, it's much broader, I'm pleased to say. Now it's really widened out and encompasses so many different people and so much more diversity, and I'm very pleased about that.
Yeah, that's good as well, isn't it? Okay, brilliant. So thank you for that. So could we maybe speak a bit about the research you've done as well for trans mental health and the study that was quite groundbreaking?
Wow, yeah, that actually came through TBA as well, because we were seeing the same people coming back year after year with the same stories, and new people coming up who were telling us exactly the same stories that people had been telling us 5, 6, 7, 8 years before that, in the community, of discrimination and poor treatment in the clinics and all these sorts of things. And we were constantly frustrated by that, and all of these things, that it just seemed so obvious to us that there were huge systemic issues, and whenever we tried to raise these in the right places, we were always asked to prove what we were saying. And there just wasn't the data. Cis people were not asking the right questions, because they were starting from the wrong place. They didn't know what to ask or how to ask or who to ask, so we had to do it ourselves. And that's where it came from. I was in Scotland at the time, and I approached the Scottish Trans Alliance for a small amount of funding to help us run it. And then Dr. Louis Bailey and Dr. Sonia Ellis came on board to work with me, and we had a small research team. And within, I think, 9 months, we had run this enormous study and then turned it around and produced the findings, which is almost unheard of. But we were like,
wow,
this has to get out there.
Yeah.
We knew that trans mental health was a public health crisis that was happening, and no one was listening to that, which just seemed ludicrous to all of us. And the data was completely irrefutable. We published it as a report that's still freely available on the internet, because a lot of data gets published in journals that people just can't see. So we didn't, what's the point in making information happen if activists and people who need it can't use it? So we did that. Yeah. And we published in journals as well, just for scientific rigor. And yeah, so it none of the findings were a surprise to us, but they were shocking and really depressing. And as I think it's a real difficulty if you are trans and you're doing research or you're working in trans mental health, it does have a personal impact, because it is personal, because it's not those people over there or this group of clients, it's us and my community that are struggling,
And what were some of the key findings from that?
I guess, and I suppose this is pertinent because, we're talking about this in relation to TDOR. That, the main one for me was the huge rates of suicide attempts and self-harm, which were, over 40%, and that's unheard of. I can't think of any other group of people, really. It's very rare that you get those kind of levels. So that was sobering. I think. And that actually really drove me to take it to a lot of different conferences with a lot of different stakeholders. I was like, everyone needs to know this. This is a real problem. And yeah, that was a biggie. The rates of discrimination that people were experiencing were huge. The fear that people had about being visible in public and about risk of harm to themselves through going out and being seen as trans or as gender or as non-binary or gender non-conforming in some way, you know, all of these things were significant. And the thing that was, again, totally unsurprising to us, but which we were really pleased to finally have some data on, was about the impact of transition. And we didn't define transition as a medical process or as something through gender clinics. We defined it as as however the person wanted to define it, as some process of embodying outwardly more that, you know, something that reflected who the person felt they were. I can't remember, it was something like that, but it was about self-identification.
Yes, yeah.
You know, not medicalized. And the data were absolutely clear that all of these things, and depression, anxiety, and all of this stuff in trans people and non-binary people who wanted to undergo some form of transition, if that was delayed, that worsened mental health. If people were enabled and supported to go through that, that improved mental health.
Yeah.
So the single best thing that services could be doing to improve trans people's mental health is facilitating rapidly transition for those who want it.
Yeah. Okay. That's really, I suppose it just affirms what in our community we would know already, doing the work that we do with Lancashire LGBT, for example, supporting a lot of trans people. But it's important to have that backed up, obviously, like you say, by scientific research. So just for people who are watching and want to access that report, what do they need to type into Google to find it, Jay?
Oh, okay. If you Google Trans Mental Health Study 2012, it's you know, I mean, we sort of need to repeat it really to see what's going on now. But
absolutely.
You know, just to see. But yeah, or if you go to the Scottish Trans Alliance's website, they also have a link to it there as well, and it's just worth going there anyway.
Yeah, well, what we can do is in the description of this when it goes on YouTube, we can put things in there, so we can put a link to it there even for people who are watching it later on and want to find that study. You mentioned there about TDOR. Obviously, yes, this event is it's a bit belated because TDOR was on Saturday, but it's for Trans Day of Remembrance. And for people who don't know, it's actually been the worst year on record for murders of trans people. So, and just obviously there's a lot of transphobia out there in the news at the moment. In light of that, do you have anything to mention about that, Jay? Any thoughts or feelings to comment on with that?
Yeah, I mean, it's TDOR is an important event for all of us, I think, and it rightly should be. I guess one thing I would say is that something that we've seen in research that we've done is that the fear of victimization is more significant, is more prevalent than actual harassment or actual harm. So while these things are undoubtedly happening and are horrific and shouldn't be at all, obviously, the fear of those things happening to you can stop you going out and doing things, can stop you actually living your life.
Yeah.
And one of the best things I think to do in a transphobic world that tells you that you're not as valid or you're not as valuable is to stick a finger up at that and to live your life the best way you can, in whatever way you can. And so we need to acknowledge that this stuff is happening, and that needs social and political change. But at the same time, it's also really important to not stop that, letting you get on with your life too. Because that fear is almost more disabling than the events themselves. So I guess, that's probably the main thing I'd say is we need to acknowledge it, but we also need to recognize that the likelihood of you coming to any harm is relatively small. And we need to fight it by being ourselves and being who we are.
Yeah, I think that's really good guidance there, Jay. So thank you for sort of spinning it in that way. Obviously, TDOR is horrendously tragic, the things that have come out this year, and we do need to take that moment to be with that sobering data that we've seen this year, for example. But like you say, also trans people need to go out there and live their lives, and deserve that above all else, and not let the fear become paralyzing.
Yeah.
Okay, so I suppose that kind of segues us on to discussing around protecting ourselves from burnout, around like stuff around TDOR and just the transphobia that's in the press at the moment. Is there any kind of guidance that you suggest on that, how best to avoid burning out and, you know, do some self-care really?
Oh my gosh, I mean, honestly, there's so much I could say about that, and I'm like,
Go
I
on.
need to try and like, you know, reduce it a little bit. So actually,
It's fine, we've got time.
um, I think the first thing that I would say is remember that not everyone is out to get you first and foremost. That what we're hearing, which often is leading to burnout, is that we're getting caught up in these arguments and these debates. But actually, what this is a very vocal minority who just also have a large platform, and that actually the majority of people are not hostile, actually are generally quite benign and often quite supportive. So I guess that's the first thing that I find helpful to think about when it feels really overwhelming, is that yes, these voices are loud, but they aren't that many. There's probably a lot more of us as well. So, you know, and a lot more of us with allies as well. So that helps me, I think.
Yeah, that's really helpful.
And I think the most important thing is that we need to start from a place of compassion. And I guess I think initially I'm thinking about that as compassion for ourselves, before the rest of the world. So this system that we're in is sick, really. It's an ill system that we're trapped in a lot of the time, and we need to know when to step back from that and when to not engage with the things that are happening around us, to look after ourselves. Just being is enough in a world where you hear messages that you have no value, you aren't as important as others. Just being is good enough. Being in that world every day, in a hostile world, self-care in and of itself, no matter how small that act of self-care is, it's an act of defiance and an act of resistance. And that's so important. Resilience, you know, comes through looking after ourselves first and foremost, and our communities next.
Yeah, I think that's brilliant to frame self-care as an act of defiance and resilience. I think that's so useful. What are sort of your kind of tips for self-care? If someone's thinking, I want to do it, but I don't even know where to start.
Yeah, I mean, I guess so. There's all the sort of usual stuff that I as a psychologist talk to people about. So there's things like mindfulness is actually really helpful. You know, it can work really well for some people. You know, it has a really good physiological reaction in the body. There's a whole load of data about that. So practicing mindfulness, and there's tons of stuff online, YouTube videos and apps that will help you with that.
Yeah.
But that's really about just being in the present moment, because it's really easy to get caught up in, especially when there's so much negativity and so much kind of hitting you from all sides from the media. It's really easy to get caught up in a kind of downward spiral, and actually just focusing on being here in the present, where you are right now, and grounding yourself in that can be really helpful. So there's stuff like that. There's the usual things like, you know, talk to people. You know, the world that we're in is really challenging if you're trans or non-binary, or you don't fit it in any way, really. So talk to people, find community wherever you can. So, you know, there's a ton of research out there in trauma work and also in minority stress, that finding community, finding those safe people and safe places where you can do you, is one of the most important things that you can do to look after yourself and to practice self-care. And you know, I think some friend said to me last night, you know, that if you can think it or you're experiencing it, someone else out there is experiencing it or has thought it as well, and you will find those groups. You know, especially now that it's so much easier with the internet, and also there's so much more happening online because of lockdown. You know, you'll find those people. You know, they're the ones who are going to support you, and find that, because it is so important. So yeah, things like that. And then there's more specific things, I guess, which are much more relevant to us in our communities. So I guess thinking about one of the biggest drains for our mental well-being at the moment is often just whatever storm is happening in the media at any given moment, whatever just happens to have come up, whatever some cis academic happens to have said on a given day that's really transphobic, whatever it is. When we get pulled into these fights and into these arguments, and it's gaslighting, it's not the same. I fully recognize this is not the same as being an abusive relationship, but there are similarities psychologically. We're told that we're not valid, we're belittled, we're all those sorts of things, and so we get pulled into all of these kind of fights and these arguments. Stepping back from them and just focusing on the bigger picture as well. So all of these individual things, there's always going to be some argument happening somewhere. There's always going to be someone saying something, whether you hear about it or not. So focus on the bigger picture, focus on the important things, and try not to get caught up in the fine detail of it. It's really easy to spend an hour arguing about the minutiae of one particular word that someone's used. And miss the point, really, I guess, miss the bigger picture. It's not saying that language is very important. That's not what I mean, but we need to keep a focus on the overview as well, and actually what we need, and that's about trans rights more broadly.
And that's really sound guidance as well, especially in light of like social media culture and the way that we communicate nowadays, and can hyperfixate on things that are valid, like you say, but sometimes lose sight of the bigger picture and the broader spectrum of what's going on. So well, that's really good guidance on self-care. Thank you for that, Jay. So if we now maybe just speak a bit, I suppose, for people who are watching this on YouTube who aren't trans and maybe don't have much knowledge on what it's like to be trans or the different mental health complexities that are involved within that, maybe we could just speak a bit sort of like what are the basic mental health issues for trans people? Is it, sort of the everyday othering and microaggressions, and then up to sort of the more extreme forms?
Yeah, I think, to be honest, you've hit the nail on the head, really. It's the microaggression stuff, because if someone experiences really overt hostility, it's easy to pinpoint and say, look, there's this thing that's happened. It's easy to verbalize it and describe it to other people, and then it means that you can, if it's available, you can access some support for it. If it's that everyday kind of drip feeding of just being made to feel different, or feel like you're not quite as valid, or you shouldn't be here fitting in, or any of these things, that othering, those microaggressions, that is so important for mental health, because it's really hard to rally support for that. It's hard to pinpoint what it is, why it is that you feel a sense of depression or dissatisfaction, what it is in your world that's doing that to you. It's hard to pin it down. And I think oftentimes those things are harder to address as well, because often they come from people who are really well-meaning and who you like and who you spend time with. And they're hard to challenge. You don't want to have an argument with someone about that when there's someone you care about, and also when it feels like maybe it's just you being a bit oversensitive. Those are the sort of thoughts that come up for people.
So that's that gaslighting element again as well. If you start to think, oh, maybe I'm overreacting or being over emotional about it, but actually, when they can build up, of course, these instances of microaggressions, and they can become quite stressful for people. What would your sort of advice or guidance be around building resilience, specifically around those things? Because, like you say, it can be family members, friends, colleagues that you like and get on with, who are well-meaning, but they are still causing you pain by, for example, misgendering, or just making people feel different, but in a subtle way.
Like I said, it's actually really hard to address, and I guess the first thing is to think about how to keep yourself safe and look after yourself within that, if it is happening. So what do you need to balance that out? How can you be okay in this situation? It's harder, I think, if it's family or people who you love and who you're dependent on, or who you need a relationship with. So I guess things like if you are able to build a relationship where you can challenge things that people are saying, that's really helpful. What skills do you need to be able to have those conversations? So it's crap that people are in the situation where they have to have these conversations and manage these dynamics. But these are skills that you can learn, and there's a ton of resources again about how to pick up assertiveness skills, how to have challenging conversations. These aren't things that are innate abilities that we're all born with. That everyone has to learn those, and it's hard, but you can. And I guess being able to tolerate a certain amount of discomfort to have those conversations is really important.
Yeah.
Are there other people that you can bring along, you can enlist to help model the right way of interacting, if there is a right way? What allies can you tap into so it's not just you, and how can you get support for just how it leaves you feeling afterwards? These are all important considerations.
Absolutely. I was going to sort of think then about allyship, and because it shouldn't fall on just the trans person alone to challenge it, if you will. And I suppose if you don't feel that there's allyship around you, it's then, we spoke before about community building, making sure that you have a community that does understand you, that does get you. And then when you do have whether it's your fortnightly support group session with them, you can speak about it then and unload, and hopefully find a degree of comfort and even guidance from that peer support, I suppose, is quite useful as well.
Definitely.
Yeah. Okay. Is there anything else you want to add around that?
No, that's good. I mean, yeah, there'll be a million things that come to me in a minute, as soon as we finish talking.
No problem at all. No, that's been really, really good guidance, actually. So now maybe if we speak a bit more to your personal experience, if that's okay, Jay, as a trans man, and your trajectory with mental health, and I suppose what you found most useful to help you cope.
I think when I was younger, just having someone believe me was probably the most important thing. Having a space where I could talk openly and feel heard, feel seen. And honestly, I think that's one of the most important things that we can ever do for anyone, is to really leave them with the sense that they have been seen for who they are. And I think that was invaluable to me. And I think nowadays, the things that kind of, I guess, keep me psychologically happy and well are spending time with people I care about, are balancing. I'm much more careful about my boundaries, about balancing, doing stuff that is emotional labor, and balancing that with things that kind of replenish me in as it were. So, if I'm doing stuff around suicide and trans people, I know that that's going to make me feel awful. And so I will, I'll put things around that to support me in doing that work. I have burnt out. That has happened to me in the past, and I think the key thing I noticed there was that it was that kind of real sense of just anger and resentment at the world, and just not being able to get past it. And that was the point where I just had too many things going on in my life. I was trying to do my doctorate. I was working with TBA. I was writing and researching trans suicide. And all those things just become huge. And then there was also discord within the community as well, and we were taking flack from other community members as well, and it was just I just couldn't do it. And the thing that helped there was actually just being able to know when to step back and when to say no. And I'm really pleased that I had that ability. I haven't always, and I think that's really true for a lot of people who are activists or engaged in this kind of work, is there's always more to do.
Absolutely.
It's never ending. There's always a piece of legislation, there's always an argument that needs to be had, there's always some fight going on somewhere, and they're all really important. And how on earth do you prioritize them, and how do you look after you within that? It's really difficult. So knowing when to give, not even just knowing when, we often know, but it's giving ourselves permission to step back sometimes. And I know that is a massive place of privilege as well, because not everyone has the ability to be able to step back from a fight that's happening or from something that's going on. But even where you can't literally put a stop in it, doing it in any small way that you can to give yourself that mental space away from it, to give yourself time where you're not engaged in that, whatever it is, even if it's 5 minutes, when you're like, you turn off notifications on your phone, you don't look at the comments and things, whatever it is, do that. That you will always have some control over some part of that, even if you don't have control over all of it.
Yeah, absolutely. I suppose that's part of boundary setting, and like picking your battles, I guess, would you say is is a fair way to put it.
Yeah, definitely.
Yeah, because you got to look after yourself first and foremostly, haven't you?
Yeah, that was that. So you can't pour from an empty jug or something like that. I can't remember, but it's really
Yeah.
true.
Yeah, especially like you say, as activists, people who are engaged with these issues, it can lead to burnout because you're giving and giving, you're giving, but you're not replenishing it. And what would you say were some of the indicators when you were feeling your sense of burnout that sort of were the red flags to you to say, look, I have to give myself permission to step back from this, just in case there's anyone watching who's maybe feeling on like the edge of that?
Yeah, there's a couple of psychologically, there's a few things that are quite key for burnout, and you know, there's a distinction, I guess, between burnout and depression or trauma or those sorts of things. But ultimately, any of those things are very much a cause to step back and give yourself some space. But burnout often comes with, or it can come with a sense of anger. And often that anger is misplaced. So you might get, so for example, if a psychologist has burnout, what they might notice is that they're getting angry with their clients for turning up to their appointments and stuff like that, you know. So if you're feeling like that, if you're feeling out of control, or if you're feeling like just exhausted and you're not sleeping and you feel sick all the time, you know, those sorts of things that kind of indicate that you're running on adrenaline and cortisol and all those stress hormones, and you're not getting that time to, you know, your body hasn't been able to de-stress. Those things are really key to notice. If your heart's racing, if you know, all that sort of stuff, keep an eye out for it. It's really important, because I think that, you know, we live in a world that, as I said before, can be really difficult. And oftentimes we are positioned in a way where we're fighting each other so much, and it's distraction. You know, if we are fighting each other and we're fighting against ourselves and we're getting to the point of burning out where we can't fight anymore, it's kind of like we're being taken away from the thing that we need to be doing.
Yeah.
I don't know how to describe it, but we live in a patriarchy, and yeah, it's distraction. It's diverting our attention away from actually where we really need to look, which is right at that.
Yeah, absolutely. Couldn't agree more. Okay. Well, that's been really, really useful. I'm thinking now, maybe, is there anything else you want to add before we go on to the questions? Anything that, you know, you thought might come up but didn't? Any other things you want to say?
I don't think so. I guess just, yeah, you know, just oh no, my primary piece of advice, which I'm sure everyone knows, never under any circumstances, no matter what, ever read the comments. Just don't do it. It's never worth it. It will only ever harm your mental health. There is no good that can come of that. No point fighting with the trolls. It's only going to make you feel worse. Leave that alone.
Yeah, I think in terms of picking battles, I
Yeah.
definitely think, yeah, reading the comments or the tweets, like going into that rabbit hole, it's
Oh, yeah.
not going to serve your mental health. It doesn't seem, I don't know anyone who's ever got anything good out of that.
No, but it's so tempting, right? It's like, you're like, I
Oh,
just need to know what's
absolutely.
being said.
Absolutely, of course it is. But yeah, I think that's a real sound piece of advice. And if anyone's watching it who does that and is finding that it's stressing them out, it's having a negative impact on their mental health, or it's becoming obsessive even in some cases, which is all super easily done, and I can see how that happens. But yeah, I think that's a real good piece of guidance there, that it's not the best thing for our mental health. Or at least if you feel like you have to do it, I guess set some boundaries.
Yeah.
Don't do it every
Yeah.
day.
Yeah, not when you're laying in bed trying to go to sleep. Definitely not then.
No, the last thing you think about before sleep shouldn't be people's Facebook and Twitter comments.
No, definitely not.
Okay, well, thank you for that, Jay. That's been absolutely brilliant. I think there's so many pearls of wisdom within that. Absolutely. We've had a couple of questions in. But firstly, also for the people who are in the chat, Lewis has posted a couple of useful links. So thank you for that, Lewis. And we'll also, like I said, for the people who are watching the YouTube, we'll put all them in the description for you. So yeah, I'll start with the questions now. Read out the first one. It says, I had trouble joining both halves of my identities together. Would you say having two identities plays a part in mental illness within certain members of the trans community, i.e., the difficulty of living two lives in one body?
That is such an interesting, such a good question. it's really hard to comment on the specifics of this without knowing much more information.
Yeah.
But it is really hard feeling like this, and I'm glad that whoever asked has asked about it. So I think what I would say is that feeling fragmented, like there are multiple parts to you, that isn't the issue in itself. That isn't a cause of psychological problems or distress. It's a reflection of something else that's going on. So something else that's preventing you from forming a strong, stable sense of self. So, I mean, there are some psychological experiences where you might have multiple parts of you that coexist, but I don't think that's what's being asked about here. Um, so I'd say pay attention to the barriers. Look at where you feel most separate and where you feel the most connected. Who helps you to feel more like a whole person? What experiences make you feel like you're in two parts? Those things are what need to change, and that sense of self will come after that. So it's not uncommon when people feel pulled in lots of different directions, or they aren't validated or respected for who they are. So they have to hide parts of themselves in different circumstances. And I guess it's also really normal to feel like you've been broken into pieces after something traumatic has happened. But generally, people are really good at putting those pieces back together over time, because our brains like a narrative, they like a story, and they like things to make sense. So I guess I would say if it's going on for a while and you feel stuck, or it's causing a lot of upset, that it feels like you're leading two lives, that's when to do something about it. It's when to seek some help. That's when you might need a bit of extra assistance to do that. And I guess it, for some trans people, they may feel that there's two very distinct lives. And it really depends on your social circumstances as well, and who's around you, and how each part of you is being perceived and being interacted with. That can really influence it as well. But if you're stuck and you're upset and this is something that's worrying, absolutely seek some help for it. Definitely.
And what would be your sort of advice with how to go about that?
So that really depends on what your resources are. So as to what options you have. So there is a class and poverty element in this. So if you have the means, it's really easy to get help for all this sort of stuff, because you can go online and find a therapist who will know about all of these things and who can support you. Having said that, there are lots of really good private therapists. Thinking about things like Pink Therapy and other organisations, and Gender Intelligence's accreditation scheme and all that sort of stuff, who also charge on a sliding scale. So for some people that will be £1 a session, for some people it will be 100. It will really vary. So if you're struggling to find help on the NHS, you do explore private avenues, because most therapists will offer something that could help. In terms of NHS, to be honest, our options are really limited at the moment. So if someone has high levels of distress, if they're struggling with suicidality, all those sorts of things, you might well be able to access a community mental health team. But for a lot of people, if you're feeling depressed or anxious, the first line would be it's called Improving Access to Psychological Therapies, IAPT, but it is, and they have different names, different places. So I think in Preston it's Minds Matter. They're all over the country. Your GP can direct you, and there you will find things like CBT for low mood, right up to interventions for trauma and all sorts of things. So it could take you a little while to find the right thing, but don't give up. There is a lot of help out there, and turn to organisations like Lancs LGBT who can offer that support to help you along the way as well.
Yeah, I think it's worth saying that we do have some in-house counselling at Lancashire LGBT, and other charities have that as well. It's just not as known. And like you say, even private therapists will often offer like a sliding scale. So yeah, and there's sometimes where you can specifically find a therapist who's had the same lived experience as you, which can also be beneficial and helpful in some cases. Would you say, Jay?
Absolutely. The all of the research shows that it's actually almost irrelevant, not quite, but it's almost irrelevant what mode of therapy someone delivers, whether it's CBT or psychodynamic psychotherapy. The main thing that makes the biggest difference is the connection that you have between therapist and client. So basically just find someone that you connect with. And I think it's easier if you are trying to connect with someone who has a similar enough lived experience, because it shortcuts a lot of things, doesn't it?
Yes.
Less explaining that you have to do, and especially if you do end up having to pay for it, you don't want to spend your money telling someone else about trans stuff, right?
Yeah, educating them.
Right.
Especially if you're paying for it. So I think that's something that people should maybe look out for if they're searching for a therapist, if they're in a position where they can pay for it, or they can pay a little bit and want to explore that. If you want to also add on to that, trying to specifically find a therapist that's got the same or similar lived experience as you, then go for it.
Yeah, but there are a lot, actually. There's quite a lot of trans and non-binary therapists out there now. There's, we're growing in number, which is really positive.
Yeah, that's very positive. Again, it's the representation as well to be able to see that. Okay, so the next question is from someone, and they're saying, I'm going through hell at the moment with some family not accepting my identity, and mum constantly misgendering me at hospital appointments. It makes my depression and anxiety worse. How can I safely affirm my identity around those people with no acceptance?
This is so difficult, and I'm so sorry that this person is in this situation with their families. Honestly, it's just one of the toughest things to deal with if you're trying to assert your identity and the people you most want to be there helping are actually getting in the way of that. We've touched on a little bit of this. I'll let's have a think about it in this context as well. So when it's family, and if you otherwise have a good relationship, I'd suggest starting, even if you can, I'd suggest starting with compassion for them. So you may have known for a really long time before they did about who you are, and it might take them a while to catch up. Do they know? Have you been really explicit about the impact that this is having on you? If you have, and they're trying, talk with them about how you can remind them if you have the energy, and prompt them, and how you can prompt them when they get it wrong. I tend to feel mostly people want to do the right thing and they're genuinely trying. And if they are, if we can, it's good to give them a bit of leeway, because they're likely to get there in the end. And if the relationship's important to you as well, if they know and actually they just refuse to acknowledge you, or nothing's changing, then that's when asserting your boundaries becomes necessary. And I don't know how old the person asking this question is, and I think being younger can make this harder if you're dependent on family members or for housing and food and things. But find where you can influence it. Do you have friends or other people who know you and the other family members who can model the right behavior, using the right language and names, enlisting those allies again? Do you feel safe to contradict them when they use the names or pronouns which are not wanted? These are important questions. I know, some of it is thinking then on balance about how much you need that relationship versus how much you need to be authentic to yourself.
Right.
I know people who've made the trade-off to not pursue a transition they might otherwise have because they valued the relationship with their partner more, for example.
Right.
It's not a choice I would have made, but it's a choice that some people feel comfortable making. So work out what good enough for you is and reach for that, and find as much support as you can to balance it out. And above all, just look after yourself. If you need to walk away ultimately from people, that's also valid, as much of a valid choice as staying with them and pursuing it. But it's about looking after your well-being within that as much as you can. It's a really difficult position. I'm so sorry that you're in that position.
Yeah, thanks for that, Jay. I think that it's something that is quite common with the people that we support, and obviously, as we know, within the community in general. And it's a really heartbreaking situation to be in when it's family, and to make the ultimate decision to walk away or not, or like you say, compromise some degree of personal authenticity it's horrible. It's really horrible. But I suppose it's about building up resilience when you're in that, and finding ways to manage and cope through the things that have been discussed in this session: community, self-care, all those things that are really important. Okay, so the last question is, what can be done to address the gender identity clinic waiting times? How can we reach out better with other groups, e.g. general public and radical feminists, to improve understanding? That's in their words.
Okay, right. I'll be as quick as I can on this. running out of time.
We have 5 minutes.
Excellent. It's kind of two questions. GIC waiting times, that's one thing. So in my short answer would be we need a completely different model of healthcare, to be honest. So most clinicians, not all, but most are genuinely caring about their clients and are trying to do the best that they can. And it's important to separate that out from what I'm very critical of and have always been very critical of, which is the systems that they're working in. So our model of trans healthcare, from WPATH and all that is historic. It's been around since like the 60s. You know, the kind of the waiting, the multiple appointments, maybe hormones, real life experience, surgery, this kind of pathway.
Yeah.
And the hoops that people have to jump through. This has zero evidence behind it. It was something that happened in the 60s. It's been perpetuated for decades on the balance of expert opinion. And that's it. In fact, all of the evidence that we're getting is actively against this model of healthcare. It delays transition, which causes harm. Not having the right type of support because it's been kind of cis down rather than trans up, I guess. I'm much more in favour of doing away with all of that and focusing on informed consent models of healthcare, because most people can make an informed decision about the treatments or not, or the social support, or whatever it is that they need. They don't need a psychiatrist to tell them that. Some people do need a lot of extra support. By and large, most people know when they need a lot of extra support. So I guess what I'd say is a one-size-fits-all model is absolutely no use whatsoever. So yeah, that's the short answer. I think we need to do
that's
that.
A really good answer. Really good.
And for the second part of that, which was about how to kind of, I guess, bring other people along. First and most importantly, it isn't necessarily your job. So you might sometimes be placed in a position where you have no choice by, for example, being visible or being out, but it is not your job to have to bring people along. And if you have to, because of your position, it doesn't mean it's okay that you're in that position. And if you don't have to, you need to make it an active choice where you've weighed up the harm to you and your community and how much energy you have spare to this and what this costs you. So, you know, we need activists in our community, but we also have to pick our battles, as we were talking about burnout earlier. So if we're going to engage with people who are transphobic, it does have a cost on our personal mental health, and we have to balance that where we can. First and foremost, I think is realistically pick the people that you're wanting to bring along. So people who are absolutely entrenched, whose starting point is, you know, if they're talking to me that I'm just a confused lesbian and I need to just accept being gay, obviously we're not. We're starting from radically different perspectives. So, you know, find the people who are marginal, find the people who are open to talking about this stuff. Most of the kind of like the transphobic arguments are so utterly ridiculous that they're really, really refutable, and they just need someone to sit down and have a conversation with. The stuff that really works for bringing people along, unfortunately, is the kind of hearts and minds stuff, which is borne out in the research. It's not giving people facts, it's letting people make a connection. So spending that time investing in those relationships where you think that they're buildable. But also remember to look after yourself within that, because it does mean exposing yourself to a lot of ignorance and people, you know, just people engaging with microaggressions just because they don't know, but it still has an impact on you. So it's not your job to educate people or put up with it if they do ignorant things, but if you do have the energy and time to engage with it, it can help. You know, so do what you need to do in the moment for you, but if you do challenge people and you're able to, try and do it compassionately where possible. Find that common starting place. Share the bits that you share. You know, often I think a lot of people have, especially kind of marginal people, have bought into the kind of the narrative of, you know, trans women are a danger to cis women and girls. Well, something we can all share is that there are lots of dangers to cis women and girls. Doesn't exclude trans women, doesn't exclude other trans people or non-binary people. Let's bring everyone along in that, you know. So find that thing where you can make a connection and fight from there. Stick to broad themes and issues, not specifics. And find your allies and build those relationships. That will help.
I think that's so useful, especially everything you said about everything having a price tag. I think that's something that we can very easily forget. And yeah, seeking out commonalities with people who disagree with us is a really good approach as well. But yeah, the main bit being, of course, that we have to look after ourselves first and foremost, which I think has been the main takeaway, actually. Okay, is there any final concluding statements you've got, Jay, or should we leave it there?
No, I'd love to be able to say something really wise and poignant at the end, but
Just little quotes.
Yeah, just find your community and look after yourself.
Well, you've said wise and poignant things throughout this hour. So yeah, that's absolutely fine. Thank you so much. Honestly, you've been absolutely phenomenal, as expected. I actually can't wait to watch this back myself and listen to what you've said again, because I think it's been so informative and insightful, and got a lot from it. And thank you so much to Craig, of course, for doing our BSL interpreting for us there. It's brilliant. Okay, everyone. Well, thank you for tuning in and watching, and take care and have a good evening. Bye now. Bye.